March 1993 brings a bitter chill to the English countryside as a secure transit van speeds away from the looming brick walls of Broadmoor Hospital. Rain lashes the windows while 29-year-old Jennifer Gibbons rests her head against the shoulder of her identical twin sister, June. Her breathing turns shallow, her chest stutters, and her heart stops beating altogether. June sits beside the corpse of her sister without shedding a tear, watching the scene unfold with an unsettling sense of peace. Society tells us the bond between identical twins represents the purest form of companionship, a magical connection built on unconditional love and unbreakable trust. But that belief shatters when you examine a connection so parasitic that two women conclude the only path to freedom requires one of them to die. The strangers in a strange land. The architecture of this tragedy takes shape long before the twins ever see the inside of a maximum security psychiatric facility. The story originates with their parents, Gloria and Aubrey Gibbons, who leave the warm, familiar shores of Barbados in the early 1960s to build a new life in the United Kingdom. Aubrey secures a position as a technician for the Royal Air Force, a job that demands constant relocation and uproots the family every few years. June and Jennifer are born in 1963 at a military hospital in Yemen, entering the world just 10 minutes apart. From the moment they open their eyes, they possess an intense, unbreakable focus on one another, ignoring the bustling environment around them. The family eventually settles in Haverfordwest, a small insular town in the coastal county of Pembrokeshire, Wales, during the 1970s. Haverfordwest presents a bleak and unforgiving landscape for the young girls. The town features rows of grey stone houses, persistent rain, and a tight-knit community that views outsiders with deep suspicion. The Gibbons family stands out immediately, as they are the only black family in the entire town. Aubrey and Gloria provide a loving, structured home, but they hold strict, traditional values that discourage open discussions about emotions or mental health. They expect their children to behave, go to school, and blend in as much as possible. But blending in proves to an impossible task for June and Jennifer. The moment they step onto the playground of their primary school, the local children target them with relentless hostility. The playground becomes a daily battleground where the twins endure cruel taunts, physical shoving, and profound alienation. The other students mock their heritage, their skin color, and the slight speech impediment that makes them lisp when they speak English. Children possess a primal instinct for survival, and when the outside world presents nothing but danger and rejection, they retreat to the safest place they can find. For June and Jennifer, that safe place is not a physical location, but the space that exists between them. They realize they cannot control the cruelty of their classmates, but they can control their own reactions. They make a silent, unspoken pact to shut out the hostile universe. They stop answering questions in class. They stop responding to the playground bullies. Eventually, they stop speaking to their own parents. The silence starts as a defensive shield, a way to deprive their tormentors of any reaction, but it soon hardens into an impenetrable fortress that locks the rest of humanity outside. The fortress of silence. The silence baffles the adults in their lives. Teachers assume the girls suffer from severe shyness and try to coax them out of their shells with gentle encouragement, but the twins stare back with blank, unblinking expressions. When gentle encouragement fails, the school authorities resort to frustration and discipline, yet punishments yield the exact same result. The twins treat the authority figures as if they are invisible. Aubrey and Gloria watch their daughters slip further away, trying everything from pleading to scolding, but nothing pierces the bubble. The girls will speak to their younger sister in rare, hushed tones when no one else is around, but the moment a parent or a stranger enters the room, they freeze. They turn into statues, their faces devoid of emotion, their bodies rigid and still. Their withdrawal from society sparks a bizarre evolution in their physical behavior. Because they refuse to communicate with the world, their communication with each other becomes hyper-concentrated. They begin to move in perfect, eerie synchronization. If they walk down the hallway to their classroom, their footsteps fall on the exact same beat. If June reaches up to brush a strand of hair from her face, Jennifer mirrors the gesture at the precise millisecond, using the exact same angle and pressure. When they sit at their desks, they cross their legs simultaneously, shift their weight together, and turn their heads in unison. It looks like a carefully choreographed performance, but it functions as a psychological survival mechanism. By moving as one entity, they project a united front that intimidates the other children and frustrates the teachers. They blur the lines between their individual identities until it becomes difficult to tell where June ends and Jennifer begins. Inside their shared bedroom, the silence vanishes, replaced by something even more unusual. When the heavy wooden door clicks shut and they know they are completely alone, the girls converse at a frantic, dizzying pace. They invent a private language, a complex idioglossia that sounds to outsiders like the rapid, high-pitched chirping of birds. It is a hyper-accelerated blend of Bajan Creole and English, spoken so fast that the human ear cannot separate the syllables. They use this language to coordinate their movements, discuss their days, and build intricate fantasy worlds. They play with dolls, creating elaborate soap operas filled with drama, crime, and punishment. They record their voices on cheap cassette tapes, staging mock radio shows where they interview each other and play different characters. The bedroom becomes their entire universe, a kingdom where they hold absolute power and the rules of the outside world hold no jurisdiction. The severed bond. The medical and educational establishments eventually decide they can no longer ignore this bizarre behavior. The school authorities bring in speech therapists, child psychologists, and special educators to evaluate the twins. The most prominent figure to enter their lives during this period is Anne Treharne, a dedicated speech therapist who recognizes the girls are not mute by nature, but by choice. She observes them in clinical settings, watching as they refuse to open their mouths or make eye contact. She eventually secures a recording of the girls speaking in their private language and realizes they possess high intelligence and a robust vocabulary. They simply refuse to share it with anyone else. Treharne attempts to break through their defenses, offering them a safe space to communicate, but the girls view her as an intruder trying to breach their fortress. The psychiatrists consult with each other and reach a disastrous conclusion. They diagnose the twins with a severe form of elective mutism and determine that their intense bond is the root cause of the problem. The doctors believe that if they separate the girls, they will force them to develop individual personalities and communicate with the world out of sheer necessity. The authorities present this plan to the parents, framing it as the only medical solution to save their daughters from a life of total isolation. The system decides to send the twins to two completely different boarding schools, tearing them apart for the first time in their lives. The separation produces a catastrophic psychological reaction. Instead of opening up to their new environments, the girls shut down entirely. When Jennifer arrives at her new school, she refuses to move from her bed. She turns her face to the wall and enters a state of near catatonia. She rejects food, refuses to drink water, and ignores the nurses who try to engage her. June exhibits the exact same behavior miles away at her own facility. The separation does not break their bond. It highlights the terrifying reality that they have lost the ability to exist as independent human beings. They function like two halves of a single organism, and tearing them apart simply causes both halves to wither and die. The medical professionals watch in horror as the girls deteriorate physically and mentally. Realizing their grand experiment has failed, the psychiatrists reverse the decision and reunite the twins. The moment they are back in the same room, they resume their synchronized movements and their shared silence, retreating even deeper into their private world. The medical system throws its hands up in defeat, leaving the teenage girls to their own devices. The paper prison. The twins finish their mandatory schooling and return to the house in Haverfordwest, locking themselves inside their bedroom. They depend entirely on the state for welfare, using their small allowance to fund their next obsession. Having given up on spoken communication, They turn to the written word to express the turbulent emotions brewing inside their minds. They purchase a pair of cheap typewriters, a stack of blank paper, and lock the door. For months on end, the only sound coming from their room is the frantic, rhythmic clacking of typewriter keys. They embark on a massive creative endeavor, writing dozens of short stories, poems, and full-length novels. Their literature does not reflect the typical interests of teenage girls. Their stories are dark, violent, and deeply unsettling, revealing a profound fascination with taboo subjects, criminality, and psychological torture. June writes a novel titled The Pepsi Cola Addict, a bizarre narrative about a high school student named Preston Wildey, who falls into a dangerous relationship with his teacher. The story follows Preston as he commits a crime and ends up in a brutal, sadistic reformatory run by a tyrannical guard. The novel drips with themes of helplessness, captivity, and the loss of personal agency. Jennifer writes her own manuscripts, including a story called The Pugilist, which centers on a desperate physician who attempts to save his dying child by harvesting the heart of a dog. Another of her stories, Discomania, describes the chaotic violence of a local dance club that descends into murder. They pour their souls into these manuscripts, hoping to achieve fame and recognition as published authors. They want to prove to the world that beneath their silent exteriors lie brilliant, creative minds. They scrape together their unemployment benefits and contact a vanity press, paying to have The Pepsi Cola Addict printed and bound. They sit in their room, waiting for the literary world to discover their genius, but the phone never rings. The books do not sell. The critical acclaim they envisioned never materializes. The failure of their writing ambitions crushes their spirits and traps them even tighter within the walls of their shared delusion. They realize they are entirely invisible to the society outside their door, the poisoned ink. While their novels focus on external, fictional characters, their private diaries capture the true, terrifying nature of their relationship. The public views them as inseparable sisters who love each other too much to interact with anyone else, but the pages of their journals reveal a deeply toxic, parasitic dynamic. They suffer from a textbook case of folie à deux, a shared psychotic disorder where two individuals feed off each other's delusions until they lose touch with reality. The diaries read like the frantic scribblings of prisoners locked in a cell with their worst enemy. June writes agonizing entries about the suffocating weight of her sister's presence. She describes Jennifer as a dark shadow that blocks out the sun, a force of nature that drains her energy and steals her identity. She documents her desperate desire to be free, to have her own thoughts, and to live a normal life. Yet, in the very next sentence, she admits she would instantly die without Jennifer by her side. Jennifer's diaries mirror this intense hatred and codependency. She writes about June with a mixture of worship and venom, detailing the vicious, silent physical fights they engage in when the bedroom door is closed. They scratch, bite, and choke each other in desperate bids for dominance, only to collapse on the floor, panting and exhausted, before resuming their synchronized behavior. They develop extreme, dangerous rituals to test their control over one another. They take turns starving themselves, declaring that one sister is not allowed to eat or breathe unless the other gives permission. They dictate every action of their daily lives through a rigid set of rules. If June decides to sit on the bed, Jennifer must remain standing until June moves. If Jennifer decides to sleep, June must stay awake and stand guard. They strip away each other's agency entirely, creating a microscopic dictatorship inside their bedroom. The pressure inside their psychological bubble builds to an unbearable level, creating a desperate need for a release valve, the fire in the dark. The transition from adolescence to adulthood brings a new, chaotic element into their lives. At the age of 19, the twins begin to venture out of their bedroom, prowling the streets of Haverfordwest under the cover of darkness. They discover alcohol, marijuana, and the intoxicating thrill of rebellion. They attempt to socialize with a group of local boys, forming brief, awkward relationships with a pair of brothers. But their lack of social skills combined with their intense, off-putting synchronization, makes these interactions volatile and strange. The boys find them fascinating but deeply unsettling, treating them more like novelties than actual companions. When the romantic pursuits inevitably end in rejection and confusion, the twins channel their burning frustration into destruction. They decide they are tired of being the silent victims of the world. They want to make the world feel the same pain, confusion and fear that has dominated their entire existence. They begin a spree of petty crimes, starting with small acts of vandalism. They walk through the quiet neighborhoods at night, throwing rocks through the windows of houses and businesses. They steal bicycles and abandon them miles away. They break into local shops to steal junk food, office supplies, and cheap trinkets. For the first time in their lives, they experience a rush of adrenaline and power. The crimes give them a shared purpose that does not involve tormenting one another. They act as a single, destructive unit, moving through the shadows without making a sound. The thrill of vandalism soon loses its potency, pushing them to seek a more extreme high. They discover the mesmerizing power of fire. Fire represents everything they are not: loud, uncontrollable, and impossible to ignore. They target an abandoned tractor dealership on the edge of town, breaking through the rusty doors with heavy stones. They gather piles of old paperwork, oily rags, and broken furniture, dousing the pile in stolen petrol. When they strike the match, the flames erupt with terrifying speed, illuminating their identical faces in the darkness. They do not run away immediately. They stand in the flickering light, watching the fire consume the structure, feeling the intense heat against their skin. The arson provides a euphoric release, a physical manifestation of the rage they have suppressed for nearly 2 decades. A few nights later, they target Pembrokeshire Technical College. They scale the fences, break through a ground floor window, and navigate the dark corridors of the institution. They systematically set fires in several different classrooms, ensuring the destruction will be widespread and devastating. They watch from a safe distance as the local fire brigades rush to the scene, sirens wailing and lights flashing against the stone buildings. The twins sit in the damp grass, their shoulders touching, sharing a rare moment of mutual satisfaction. They have finally forced the world to pay attention to them. The gates of the fortress. The local police launch a massive investigation into the sudden wave of arson and vandalism terrorizing the quiet town. It does not take long for the detectives to piece together the clues. The twins have left a trail of stolen items, distinct footprints, and eyewitness accounts of 2 identical figures moving through the streets late at night. The police arrive at the Gibbons household with a search warrant, shocking Aubrey and Gloria, who believe their daughters have been sleeping soundly in their beds. The officers search the infamous bedroom, finding the stolen trinkets, the smell of petrol on their clothes, and the detailed, meticulous diary entries documenting every single crime. The diaries serve as a complete, undeniable confession. The police place June and Jennifer in handcuffs, leading them out of the house and into the back of a squad car. The criminal justice system takes over, dragging the silent twins into the glaring lights of a courtroom. The trial presents a surreal spectacle for the residents of Haverfordwest. June and Jennifer sit in the wooden dock, dressed in matching outfits, staring blankly at the floor. They refuse to speak to their own defense attorneys, refuse to enter a plea, and refuse to acknowledge the judge presiding over the case. They maintain their perfect, synchronized silence, acting as if the entire legal proceeding is an illusion they can simply ignore. The judge reviews the evidence, looking at the extensive damage caused by the fires and reading the excerpts from their disturbing diaries. The defense pleads for leniency, pointing out that the girls are deeply troubled teenagers who suffer from severe psychological issues. They argue for placement in a rehabilitation center or a standard psychiatric hospital where the girls can receive the therapy they so desperately need. But the judge sees something entirely different. He looks at their silence not as a symptom of trauma, but as a sign of unyielding defiance and calculated malice. He determines that their intense bond makes them an unpredictable and significant danger to the public. The gavel falls, delivering a sentence that shocks the entire courtroom and stands as one of the most draconian punishments ever handed down for juvenile property damage in British history. The judge orders June and Jennifer Gibbons to be detained indefinitely under Section 60 of the Mental Health Act. He does not send them to a local hospital, nor does he send them to a standard prison. He sentences these 19-year-old girls, who have never physically harmed another human being, to Broadmoor Hospital. Broadmoor serves as the absolute end of the line in the British penal system. It is a terrifying, maximum security psychiatric fortress designed to hold the most violent, depraved, and dangerous minds in the country, housing notorious serial killers, domestic terrorists, and criminally insane psychopaths. The twins are loaded into a heavily armoured transport vehicle, their wrists bound, beginning their dark descent into an environment that will push their fragile, shared mind past the point of no return. The Iron Asylum. The heavy steel gates of Broadmoor Hospital open to swallow the armoured transport van, sealing shut with a metallic clang that echoes across the sprawling campus. The vehicle rolls onto the grounds of a Victorian fortress constructed from dark red brick, an imposing structure that resembles a Gothic nightmare rather than a place of healing. June and Jennifer step out of the van and into a world of concrete walls, iron bars, and pervasive, suffocating dread. They possess no history of violence against other human beings. They have never harmed an animal or raised a weapon against another soul. Their crimes consist of burning an abandoned building and stealing a few meaningless trinkets. Yet the British legal system has deemed them dangerous enough to share living quarters with the most notorious individuals in the United Kingdom. The hospital houses convicted serial killers, violent psychopaths, and men who have committed unspeakable atrocities against the public. The environment thrums with a constant chaotic energy. Inmates scream obscenities through the thick bars of their windows. Heavy metal doors slam shut at all hours of the day and night, vibrating the floorboards. Sirens blare at random intervals, signaling a violent outburst or an assault in one of the crowded day rooms. The stagnant air inside the wards carries the permanent, pungent odour of strong chemical disinfectants, boiled institutional food, and unwashed bodies. Into this predatory, hostile environment walk two diminutive, quiet teenage girls who refuse to speak a single word to the staff or the other patients. The psychiatric staff at Broadmoor perform their initial evaluations and reach the exact same flawed conclusion as the childhood therapists back in Wales. The doctors determine that the intense, synchronized bond between the twins represents the core source of their psychological pathology. The medical board decides to separate June and Jennifer, placing them in different wards on opposite ends of the massive hospital complex. The staff operate under the assumption that physical distance will force the girls to abandon their silent routine and interact with the nurses out of sheer necessity. This strategy backfires with devastating, immediate consequences. The physical separation plunges both girls into a state of profound psychological shock. Instead of breaking their silence, they retreat into an extreme state of physical rigidity, turning their bodies to stone to protest their isolation. When the nurses place them in chairs in the communal day room, the girls sit for hours without moving a single muscle. They do not swat away flies that land on their cheeks. They do not turn their heads when brutal fights break out among the other patients just a few feet away. They remain locked in a self-imposed paralysis, their eyes fixed on a distant, invisible point on the wall. Even separated by heavy brick walls and reinforced steel doors, the twins manage to coordinate a terrifying set of behavioral rules. They establish an invisible, telepathic connection that defies all medical logic and frustrates the nursing staff to no end. The orderlies soon notice a bizarre, impossible pattern in their eating habits. On a Tuesday, June will accept her meals, consuming the bland hospital food with mechanical, emotionless precision. On that exact same Tuesday, on a completely different floor of the hospital, Jennifer will clamp her mouth shut, refusing to swallow a single drop of water or a crumb of bread. The next day, the invisible pendulum swings in the opposite direction. Jennifer will clear her plate, while June engages in total starvation. They alternate their fasting days with flawless accuracy, executing a silent hunger strike that the hospital staff cannot break or comprehend. The chemical straitjacket. The psychiatrists grow infuriated by their complete lack of progress. The twins refuse to participate in group therapy, ignore the doctors during individual evaluations, and maintain their impenetrable wall of silence. Desperate to assert control over the situation, the medical staff turn to the blunt instruments of the institutional psychiatric system. The doctors prescribe massive doses of powerful antipsychotic medications, hoping to shatter the delusions that bind the girls together. The nurses force the twins to swallow heavy, mind-altering tranquilizers that turn their sharp intellects into a cloudy, disjointed fog. The drugs rob them of their physical coordination and their creative spark. The side effects ravage their bodies and their minds with equal brutality. Their vision blurs, rendering them unable to read the books they once loved, or write the complex stories that used to give them purpose. Their hands develop constant, uncontrollable tremors, a severe neurological side effect of the heavy sedatives pumping through their veins. The bright, imaginative teenagers who once typed entire novels in their bedroom now struggle to hold a simple pencil or guide a spoon to their mouths. The heavy medication causes them to gain massive amounts of weight, distorting their physical appearance and plunging them deeper into a pit of depression. The hospital environment strips away every shred of their humanity, leaving them as drugged, compliant shells. They spend their days shuffling down the linoleum corridors, their eyes glazed over, their once perfect synchronization replaced by the sluggish, uncoordinated movements of heavily medicated patients. The doctors document this lethargy as a sign of progress, mistaking their drug-induced stupor for submission to the rules of the ward. When the doctors occasionally allow the girls to reunite for supervised visits, the nurses observe a chilling dynamic. The twins do not embrace or express joy at seeing one another. Instead, they sit in the visitation room and engage in bizarre, silent battles for dominance. They communicate through micro-expressions, sharp glares, and subtle shifts in posture. The nurses document instances where the girls will sit perfectly still, yet the tension in the room feels thick enough to cut with a knife. They possess a love for each other that is entirely entangled with a deep, homicidal resentment. They are prisoners of the hospital, but they are also prisoners of each other, locked in a toxic orbit from which neither can escape, the bridge to the outside. A fragile lifeline appears in the form of a persistent investigative journalist named Marjorie Wallace. She works for a prominent national newspaper and hears strange rumors about two silent, non-violent teenage girls locked away in the nation's most secure psychiatric fortress. Appalled by the sheer injustice of their draconian sentence, she secures special permission from the hospital administration to visit the girls. Marjorie wants to uncover the truth behind their silence and expose the failure of the justice system that placed them in such a dangerous environment. Marjorie drives to Broadmoor and navigates the intense security protocols, passing through multiple locked checkpoints and metal detectors. She waits in a barren, windowless visiting room, unsure of what to expect from these mysterious inmates. The guards escort the twins into the room. The girls move with that same eerie, synchronized shuffle, taking their seats on the opposite side of a heavy wooden table. They do not look at the journalist. They stare at the scratches on the table surface, their faces blank, their bodies slumped under the weight of the antipsychotic drugs. Marjorie takes a different approach than the doctors. She does not push them to speak. She does not treat them like broken patients or violent criminals. She talks to them in a calm, respectful voice, acknowledging their intelligence and their dignity. She tells them she wants to understand their story, offering them a chance to share their perspective with the outside world. She leaves a fresh notebook and a pen on the table, stands up, and promises to return the following week. This simple, radical act of respect pierces the heavy armor the twins have worn for decades. The girls do not speak a single word to Marjorie during that first encounter, but a few weeks later, a letter arrives at the newspaper office in London. The envelope contains a beautifully written, highly articulate message from the twins. They pour their hearts out onto the paper, using a vocabulary that shocks the journalist. They describe the horrors of the hospital, the mind-numbing effects of the medication, and the suffocating nature of their bond. This initial letter sparks a years-long, profound correspondence. Marjorie visits the hospital on a regular basis, becoming their only reliable bridge to the outside world. she smuggles in blank diaries, giving the girls a private sanctuary to document their internal torment. Through these written exchanges, the journalist begins to unravel the complex, terrifying psychology that keeps the girls tethered together. She realizes that the silence is not an act of defiance against the hospital, but a symptom of a lethal psychological contract they have forged with one another. The architecture of a nightmare. The diaries smuggled out by Marjorie Wallace reveal a staggering level of self-awareness. The girls know their bond is toxic, yet they lack the power to sever it. The public views them as inseparable sisters who love each other too much to interact with anyone else, but the pages of their journals paint a picture of a brutal, unending psychological war. They document a textbook, extreme case of folie à deux, a shared psychotic disorder where two individuals feed off each other's delusions until they completely lose touch with reality. The diaries read like the frantic, desperate scribblings of prisoners locked in a dark cell with their worst enemy. June writes agonizing, lengthy entries about the crushing weight of her sister's constant presence. She describes Jennifer as a dark shadow that blocks out the sun, a force of nature that drains her physical energy and steals her individual identity. She documents her desperate, burning desire to be free, to possess her own thoughts, to walk down a street without matching her footsteps to another person. Yet, in the very next paragraph, she admits with terrifying clarity that she would instantly drop dead if Jennifer ever left her side. She hates her sister, but she requires her sister to breathe. Jennifer's diaries mirror this intense paradox of hatred and absolute codependency. She writes about June with a volatile mixture of religious worship and pure venom. She details the vicious, silent physical altercations they engage in when the nurses are not looking. They scratch, bite, and choke each other in desperate, silent bids for physical dominance, only to collapse on the cold linoleum floor, panting and exhausted, before resuming their synchronized behavior a moment later. They strip away each other's agency entirely, creating a microscopic, totalitarian dictatorship inside the walls of an actual prison. As the years drag on inside Broadmoor, the twins come to a chilling realization. They observe the medical board hearings, listen to the psychiatrists, and analyze their own behavior. They recognize a fundamental, inescapable truth about their incarceration. Broadmoor is a holding pen designed to contain individuals until they are no longer a threat to society. The doctors will never authorize their release as long as they exhibit their bizarre, synchronized behavior and maintain their silent pact. The medical establishment demands normalcy as the price of freedom. The twins understand they cannot simulate normalcy because their bond overrides their individual will. They cannot simply choose to stop mirroring each other. They are trapped in a vicious, logical loop. The only way to convince the doctors they are cured is to break the bond. The only way to break the bond is to eliminate one half of the partnership. They cannot exist as two separate, functioning women in the real world. One must perish so the other can survive. The lethal contract. The girls do not reach this conclusion in a moment of hysterical panic. They arrive at this terrifying solution through cold, calculated logic. During their rare moments of supervised association in the hospital courtyard, they discuss their grim future. They speak in their rapid, high-pitched private language, ensuring the guards and nurses cannot decipher their morbid conversation. They draft an invisible, inescapable contract. If they ever receive a transfer out of Broadmoor, one of them must sacrifice her life the moment they leave the facility. They debate the terms of this contract with the dispassionate tone of two lawyers negotiating a business deal. They must decide who gets to live and who has to die. After days of silent negotiation and frantic diary entries, Jennifer volunteers to be the sacrifice. She accepts her fate with an eerie, unsettling calmness. She tells June that she will surrender her life to pay the toll for their freedom. Once the agreement is locked in place, a strange sense of peace settles over the twins. They stop fighting with each other. They stop rebelling against the nurses. They wait, with infinite patience, for the medical board to grant them a transfer. Marjorie Wallace visits them during this period and notices a distinct shift in their demeanor. The heavy, oppressive tension that usually fills the room has evaporated. Jennifer looks at the journalist and states, in a rare moment of spoken English, that she has decided to die. Marjorie assumes this is a metaphorical statement, a dramatic expression of her depression and the toll of the hospital environment. The journalist tries to comfort her, assuring her that better days are ahead, completely unaware that Jennifer has just confessed to a binding lethal pact. 11 agonizing years pass inside the walls of Broadmoor. The girls endure the medication, the isolation, and the constant threat of violence from the other inmates. Finally, the medical board reviews their case and acknowledges that the maximum security environment has done nothing to improve their condition. The public pressure generated by Marjorie Wallace's articles forces the authorities to reconsider their draconian sentence. In March 1993, the board approves a transfer to the Caswell Clinic, a lower security psychiatric facility in their home country of Wales. The doctors tell the girls to pack their belongings. They are finally going home. The final journey. The morning of the transfer arrives with a bitter, biting chill. Heavy, dark clouds hang over the English countryside, unleashing a relentless downpour of freezing rain. The guards escort the twins out of the brick fortress and into the courtyard, where a secure transit van waits with its engine idling. The girls wear simple clothes, clutching small bags containing their diaries and a few personal items. They step into the back of the van, taking their seats on the cold metal benches. The heavy doors slam shut, locking them in the dim, claustrophobic space. The van pulls away from Broadmoor, its tires hissing against the wet asphalt. Inside the dark cabin, the atmosphere shifts. The moment the vehicle clears the hospital gates, the invisible countdown begins. The twins sit shoulder to shoulder, their bodies swaying in perfect unison with the motion of the van. The rain lashes against the reinforced windows, creating a rhythmic, hypnotic drumming sound that fills the small space. Time seems to stretch and distort inside the moving vehicle. Every second feels like an eternity. Jennifer closes her eyes and rests her head against June's shoulder. She does not gasp for air. She does not clutch her chest in pain. She simply begins to power down, like a machine unplugged from its power source. Her breathing grows shallow, the rise and fall of her chest slowing down to a barely perceptible rhythm. June sits entirely motionless, her back straight against the metal wall of the van. She does not reach out to shake her sister awake. She does not call out to the guards sitting in the front cab. She honors the terms of their contract with absolute, terrifying devotion. She turns her head slightly, watching the microscopic beads of condensation form and fade on the cold glass of the window. She listens to the fading rhythm of Jennifer's breath. She feels the warmth draining from the body leaning against her. The van navigates the winding roads, pushing further into the Welsh countryside. Jennifer's pulse slows down, beat by agonizing beat. The vibrant, chaotic mind that created complex fantasy worlds and endured 11 years in a psychiatric fortress begins to slip into the dark. Her chest stutters one final time, releasing a soft, quiet exhale into the damp air of the cabin. Her heart comes to a complete, permanent halt. June stares straight ahead, enveloped in an absolute crushing silence that is entirely different from the silence they shared as children. This silence is final, the impossible truth. The transit van pulls into the driveway of the Caswell Clinic, the tires crunching against the gravel. The guards open the heavy rear doors, expecting to herd the two quiet patients into the new facility. Instead, they find June sitting upright, staring blankly at the floor, while Jennifer remains slumped against her shoulder, completely unresponsive. Panic erupts among the transport team. The guards shout for the medical staff. Nurses rush out of the clinic with a stretcher, pulling Jennifer's limp body out of the van and rushing her into the emergency room. The medical team works frantically to revive the 29-year-old woman, deploying defibrillators and chest compressions. But their efforts are entirely futile. Jennifer is gone. The doctors pronounce her dead on arrival, casting a dark shadow over the long-awaited transfer. The sudden, inexplicable nature of her death triggers an immediate and thorough medical investigation. The authorities demand to know how a physically healthy young woman could simply expire in the back of a transport vehicle without making a single sound. The coroner performs a comprehensive autopsy, expecting to find a hidden stash of pills, a toxic reaction to her psychiatric medication, or an undetected congenital defect. The results return a few days later, and they defy all conventional medical logic. The toxicology report shows no lethal drugs in her system. Her airway is completely clear, ruling out suffocation or choking. There are no bruises, no signs of trauma, and no evidence of foul play. The coroner determines the official cause of death as sudden acute myocarditis, a rapid and severe inflammation of the heart muscle. But the medical examiner cannot find a viral or bacterial infection to explain the sudden onset of the condition. The inflammation appeared out of nowhere, striking with lethal precision at the exact moment the girls left the gates of Broadmoor. The medical establishment is forced to confront a terrifying, unscientific possibility. Jennifer Gibbons did not die from a disease or an external injury. She utilized the immense, focused power of her own mind to command her heart to stop beating, fulfilling the childhood pact she made with her sister. The price of freedom. The aftermath of Jennifer's death brings an eerie, surreal transformation to the surviving twin. A few days after the tragedy, Marjorie Wallace visits the Caswell Clinic to check on June, expecting to find a woman shattered by grief and completely detached from reality. Instead, the journalist encounters a fundamentally different person. June sits in a comfortable chair in a bright, sunlit room. When Marjorie walks through the door, June looks up, makes direct eye contact, and smiles. She opens her mouth and speaks to the journalist in clear, unaccented, perfect English. The strange, high-pitched idioglossia is gone. The rigid, synchronized movements have vanished. The impenetrable fortress of silence has collapsed. During their conversation, June does not express despair. She speaks with the calm, profound relief of a prisoner who has just walked out of a dungeon. She looks at Marjorie and delivers a sentence that recontextualizes their entire existence. She states, "I'm free at last, and at last Jennifer has given up her life for me." June integrates into society with surprising ease. She remains at the lower security clinic for a short period before the doctors determine she no longer poses a threat to herself or others. She is released back into the world, returning to her family in Wales. She learns to live an independent life, forming relationships, speaking to members of her community, and navigating the world as a singular individual. She reclaims the agency that was stolen from her, first by her toxic bond, and later by the institutional cruelty of Broadmoor. But that freedom carries an unimaginable price tag, paid in full on the cold floor of a transport van. The human mind remains the ultimate, unconquered frontier, possessing an immense power to completely overwrite physical reality. It can build fortresses of silence to block out a cruel world. It can weave two distinct souls into a single parasitic organism, and it can command a healthy heart to stop beating simply to fulfill a promise. The story of the silent twins proves that the most inescapable and deadly prisons are never constructed from brick and iron. They are always the ones we build for ourselves, locking the doors from the inside. If you are fascinated by chilling secrets that remain perfectly preserved in isolation until they are violently forced into the light, you need to see what happens when the ice finally breaks. Click the video on your screen to uncover Beneath the Ice, terrifying discoveries melting out of glaciers, and step into our next investigation right now. Detective, the Silent Twins, a bizarre case of shared psychosis.